The chair was too small for me. Not physically, it fit my body well enough, but in every other way that mattered. That chair at the far end of the Grand Council chamber was designed to remind me exactly where humanity stood in the order of things. The room itself was magnificent. I will give them that. The ceiling rose so high above us that the upper galleries were lost in a pale blue haze. The light came from no visible source, just a soft, even glow that made every delegation look important. Every delegation except ours. My name is Marcus Webb. On the morning I am describing, I had been the sole human representative to the Interstellar Compact for 6 days. My predecessor, a woman named Louise Fawn, had retired quietly after 22 years of being ignored. I had been handed her identification badge, her tiny office on Sublevel 9, and absolutely no useful advice. Louise had left one note on the desk. It said, "Keep your voice steady. They will test whether it wavers." I had read it 3 times on the shuttle ride over. The chamber held seats for 43 species. Humanity's seat was at the outermost arc, not technically the worst position since the room was circular, but the symbolism was clear to anyone paying attention. The Veth delegation sat nearest the central podium. They had been in the Compact for 900 years and had a bearing that made even their silence feel like a verdict. The Doro were beside them, then the Yulith, then another dozen species whose names I had been memorizing for weeks. And then at the very edge of the arc, where the acoustic panels did not quite reach and the translation feed sometimes cut out for half a second before correcting itself, sat the humans. One human that morning, me. The session was already underway when I took my seat. The Compact's presiding voice, a tall, silver-skinned Veth named Counselor Ari, was speaking about trade corridor adjustments in the 7th cluster. Her voice was unhurried and precise. Every word landed with the weight of someone who had never once been interrupted. I pulled up my translation feed, settled into my chair, and began paying attention. The first time I tried to speak, I raised the indicator light on my terminal. The light was supposed to signal the presiding voice that a delegation wished to address the chamber. It glowed amber for 4 minutes. Then the session moved to the next agenda item, and my light was simply passed over. I assumed it was an error. I pressed the indicator again. Counselor Ari's gaze moved across the chamber, and I watched it pass over me with no expression at all, the way a person's eyes move past a piece of furniture they have seen 1,000 times and no longer register. I did not waver. I kept my voice steady, at least internally, though I had not yet spoken a word. After the session closed, I made my way to the corridor outside and caught the attention of a young Yulith aide. They were slender creatures, pale green, with large reflective eyes that always seemed to be focused about 2 feet behind whatever they were looking at. I introduced myself. I explained that my indicator light had not been acknowledged. The aide blinked at me slowly. "The human delegation's indicator is logged in the secondary queue," he said. "Agenda items from secondary queue delegations are considered in the final period of each session, time permitting." "How often does time permit?" I asked. He blinked again. "I have been working here for 11 years, he said, and walked away. I stood in that corridor for a moment, watching the delegation stream past me. The Veth moved in small clusters, speaking quietly among themselves, their elongated fingers gesturing in the complex secondary language they used alongside spoken word. The Doro were louder, massive, broad-shouldered beings with deep voices that carried even when they were whispering. They laughed often, a rolling thunderous sound that echoed off the high walls. Nobody looked at me. Not because they were being deliberately dismissive in that moment. It was simpler than that. They genuinely did not think of me. I had known this before I arrived. Louise's briefing documents had been thorough on the subject. Humanity had been admitted to the Compact 81 years ago in what the official record called an Act of Galactic Inclusion. The unofficial truth was that a trade route mapping error had placed 3 inhabited human systems inside Compact-designated space. Rather than renegotiate the maps, the Compact had simply issued humanity a membership card. It was easier. Less paperwork. Since then, we had attended sessions. We had submitted motions. We had filed proposals regarding trade access, resource-sharing protocols, navigational rights in contested corridors, and 3 times in the past decade, emergency humanitarian requests during climate crises on Earth that had left millions displaced and without adequate food production. The Compact had reviewed each request carefully. They had returned formal letters explaining that the crises were ecological in origin and therefore fell outside the scope of interspecies relief funding, which was designated for externally caused damage only. The last letter had arrived during the year I turned 14. I remembered my father reading it at the kitchen table and not saying anything for a long time. I filed my first motion on my 7th day. It was a formal request for humanity to be reclassified from provisional membership to full sovereign status within the Compact. Full sovereign status would have given us voting rights, access to joint development programs, and most importantly, the legal standing to operate independent exploration vessels beyond the Compact's border without requiring pre-authorization from the Navigation Authority. I filed it properly. I followed every procedural rule. I submitted it in the 3 required languages, attached the supporting documentation, and flagged it for the next available agenda slot. It appeared on the agenda 12 days later, near the bottom of the 3rd session block, in a slot between a VETH fisheries licensing dispute and a proposal about memorial calendar standardization. I had 4 minutes to present it. I used all 4 minutes. I spoke clearly. I had practiced the speech so many times on the shuttle that I could feel the shape of every sentence before I said it. I made the case that humanity had fulfilled all provisional requirements. I cited the 81 years of compliance. I cited our contributions to the Compact's shared data networks, our participation in joint scientific surveys, the 12 human engineers who had died aboard a Compact station during the Veth-Douro corridor collapse because they had responded to the distress signal faster than any other crew in range. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then Councillor Ari spoke, calm and measured as she always was. "The motion is noted," she said. "The Council will deliberate." The Council deliberated for 9 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my terminal. Then the vote was called. The motion failed, 37 against, for abstaining, 2 in favor. One of those being the representative from a small, recently admitted species called the Fareth, who voted yes for reasons I never fully understood, and for which I was quietly grateful. After the session, as I was gathering my materials, I became aware that someone was standing nearby. I looked up. It was Councillor Ari herself, an unusual thing, since Senior Veth rarely approached junior delegations directly after a failed vote. It was considered by their customs to be something close to condescending. She looked at me for a moment with those pale, still Veth eyes. Her face was long and angular, her expression unreadable. "You presented the motion competently," she said. Her translation came through my earpiece with a slight delay, the way it always did with the Veth. Their speech patterns were complex, and the translation algorithms were always catching up. "I want you to understand that the vote was not personal." "I did not take it personally," I said. "Good." She studied me for another moment. "You are a young species. 81 years is very little time, even by the shortest scales we use. The Fareth, who voted in your favor, were admitted 400 years ago and are still in provisional status. This is not a punishment. It is simply the nature of the process." I looked at her. I thought about the letter my father had read at the kitchen table. I thought about the indicator light that had been passed over 4 minutes after I lit it. I thought about Louise Fawn and 22 years of steady voice. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She waited. "In your estimation, is there anything humanity could do, any threshold we could reach, any requirement we could fulfill that would result in full recognition within, say, the next 50 years? She considered this with what seemed like genuine thought. "No," she said. "That is not an insult. It is biology. Your species is very young, and the Compact is very old. These things take the time they take." She inclined her head, a Veth gesture that meant something like polite conclusion, and left. I stood there in the emptying chamber, her words sitting in my chest like something cold. Not rage, not despair. Something quieter and more durable than either. I picked up my materials. I walked back to my office on sublevel 9. I sat down at Louise's old desk, picked up her note, and read it one more time. Then I opened a new document and began writing a report, not to the Compact, to the engineering teams back home who had been working quietly, far from any council chamber, on a problem in theoretical physics that most of the Compact scientists had dismissed as impossibly ambitious. I wrote, "Take as long as you need. But do not stop." I sent it. Then I turned off the light and went to sleep. Outside the chamber, across an 81-year gap of patience and unacknowledged indicator lights and politely worded rejection letters, something was being built. Nobody in that chamber knew about it yet. That was, it turned out, exactly the point. 15 years passed. They passed the way difficult years often do. Not slowly, the way people imagine patience feels, but quickly, in the way that hard work compresses time. One day, I was the new human representative sitting in the farthest chair at the edge of the arc. And then I blinked, and I was 47 years old, and the chair felt smaller than ever, but I no longer expected it to feel otherwise. My name was still Marcus Webb. My hair had gone gray at the temples. I had learned the secondary gesture language of the Veth, the tonal honorifics of the Doro, and the 3 specific ways to address a Yulith elder without accidentally implying their fishing territories were in dispute. I had become, without quite meaning to, reasonably fluent in the politics of a council that had never once changed its fundamental opinion of humanity. We were still provisional. We were still in the secondary queue. My indicator light was still passed over roughly 60% of the time. But something had changed, and I was the only person in the chamber who knew what it was. The message had come through on a Tuesday, routed through 6 encrypted relays before it reached my terminal in the sublevel 9 office I had never bothered to redecorate. It was from a man named Conrad Hale, head of engineering at the Titan shipyard, a facility that did not appear in any compact navigation register because it had been constructed in a region of space the compact's cartographers had marked as surveyed and unremarkable 40 years ago and never looked at again. Conrad's message was 3 sentences long. Second trial completed this morning. Fold achieved and held for 19 seconds. We are ready for the next phase when you give the word. I read it 4 times. Then I deleted it from the server as we had agreed, and sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of my small office for a long time. The Rift Drive had begun as a theoretical paper written by a physicist named Ida Marsh at a university in northern England, published 11 years before I was born. The paper was titled with the flat ambition of someone who did not expect to be taken seriously, Possible Mechanisms for Controlled Spatial Folding in High-Density Gravitational Frames. The Compact Scientific Review Board had read it within a year of its publication. Their response had been polite, thorough, and dismissive. The mathematics, they said, were internally consistent, but practically impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed anything a young industrial civilization could generate by several orders of magnitude. What they had not accounted for, and this is the part that I had always loved most about the whole story, was stubbornness. Human engineers are not, as a rule, the most elegant thinkers in the known galaxy. The Veth approach theoretical problems the way a sculptor approaches stone, cutting away everything unnecessary until only the pure shape remains. The Doro are brilliant in systems, able to hold enormous complexity in their minds simultaneously. The Yulith have a form of mathematical intuition that their own scientists cannot fully explain, arriving at correct answers through paths no one can later reconstruct. Humans tend to hit things until they work. Ida Marsh's paper had sat in an archive for 30 years before a young engineer named Conrad Hale read it during a long transit flight and thought, not elegantly, not with any particular flash of insight, that the energy problem might yield if you attacked it from the other side. Not generating more energy, but storing it differently. He had written his ideas in the margins of a printed copy of the paper and lost the copy somewhere. He had then spent 6 months reconstructing the margin notes from memory, because he could not let go of the feeling that he had been on to something. That had been 16 years ago. What happened in the years between Conrad's margin notes and the message I received on a Tuesday was a story of quiet, distributed, deeply unfashionable work. There was no single dramatic breakthrough. There was no moment of genius. There was Conrad and a team of 63 engineers working in a facility that looked on any external scan like a standard mineral processing station, spending 12 to 18 hours a day on a problem that the most advanced civilization in the known galaxy had told them was not worth solving. They solved it. Not cleanly, not the way the Veth would have solved it with elegant mathematics and a single decisive experiment. They solved it the way humans solve things, iteratively, incrementally, with a great deal of trial and a great deal of failure and a great deal of going back to the beginning and trying again with slightly different numbers. The 19th major test had nearly destroyed the station. The 31st had achieved a fold of 3 centimeters that lasted for 4 milliseconds, and had caused Conrad to sit on the floor of the engineering bay and not move for 20 minutes. The second full trial, the one described in his 3-sentence message, had folded a volume of space large enough to pass a vessel through, and held it open for 19 seconds. 19 seconds was enough. I had been corresponding with Conrad carefully, through channels that existed entirely outside the compact's communication infrastructure, for 9 years. We had planned this. Not the science, that was entirely his, but the rest of it, the number of ships, the timeline, the logistics of moving every human being who wished to go. The Declaration. The Declaration had taken me 4 years to write. Not because the words were complicated, it was 3 paragraphs in the end, but because I had wanted to get the tone exactly right. I had drafted it angry, and then I had drafted it triumphant, and then I had drafted it cold. And none of those felt true. What I finally arrived at, after 4 years and more revisions than I could count, was something that felt simply honest. There was one other person in the compact who had an idea that something was happening. Not what. I do not think she had any specific intelligence, but Counselor Ari had been watching humanity with a closer attention than she showed anyone else on the council. And I had noticed her noticing me over the past several years. Veth lived a very long time. She had been on the council when humanity was admitted. She had voted on every motion we had ever filed. She had delivered my first rejection in person, back when I was 32 and still believed in the value of direct communication. She summoned me privately in the 3rd week of what would turn out to be humanity's last month in the compact. The meeting took place in a small room off the eastern corridor, not her official chambers, which were on an upper level, but a room with no recording equipment and no aides, with 2 chairs and a low table and a window that looked out onto the maintenance scaffolding of the chamber's outer shell. She was already seated when I arrived. She looked older than she had 15 years ago. The Veth aged slowly, but they did age, and there was something in her expression that I had not seen before. Not quite worry, something adjacent to it. "Sit down, Marcus," she said. She had never used my given name before. I sat. "I want to ask you something directly," she said. "And I would like a direct answer." "All right. What is humanity planning?" I looked at her for a moment. The window behind her showed the scaffolding, and beyond it, the dark. Somewhere out in that dark, Conrad Hale was running final checks on a fleet of 214 vessels whose existence the compact did not know about. "We are leaving," I said. She was still for a long time. Not surprised exactly. More like someone hearing a thing they had suspected but had not permitted themselves to fully believe until the moment of confirmation. "Leaving the compact," she said. "Leaving compact space entirely. Beyond the mapped regions. There are areas your cartographers have never reached. We intend to go there. You have developed the folding technology," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She looked at her hands, long, pale Veth hands with an extra knuckle on each finger, and then back at me. "And you chose not to share this with the Council." "We chose to develop it without the Council's involvement. Given the Compact's history with human technical proposals, we felt an independent approach was more practical." There it was. The 15 years of passed-over indicator lights, sitting in one quiet sentence. She heard it. I saw something move across her face that I could not name. "How long have you been planning this?" she said. "A long time. Since before I came here. Since before I was born, maybe. I think it started with the letter they sent after the 3rd climate crisis, the one about externally caused damage." She did not look away. She absorbed that. "If you leave," she said slowly, "you take the folding technology with you. The compact does not benefit from it." "No." "There will be members who argue that this constitutes a threat, that a species capable of this technology operating outside compact jurisdiction." "They can argue what they like," I said. "We are not going to use the technology against anyone. We are simply going to leave peacefully. We have prepared a formal declaration. 3 paragraphs. It thanks the compact for the past 81 years. She looked at me then with an expression I had never seen on a Veth face before. It was not anger. It was not calculation. It was something that on a human face I would have called grief, though I was not certain the Veth experienced grief in the same way. "You are not going to fight for recognition," she said. "No. After all this time, after everything we decided, recognition from the compact was no longer the goal." I stood to leave. She did not stop me. But as I reached the door, she spoke once more, quietly, almost to herself rather than to me. "I wish we had seen you sooner," she said. I stood in the doorway. I thought about a great many things in that moment. About my father at the kitchen table. About Louise Fawn's note. About the indicator light that had glowed amber for 4 minutes on my first day. About Conrad Hale sitting on the floor of an engineering bay after a fold of 3 centimeters. I thought about 19 seconds. "So do I said. And I meant it. Then I walked out, and I went back to my office, and I sent Conrad Hale 3 words: "Begin final checks." We filed the Exodus Declaration 6 days later. 3 paragraphs, submitted in the 3 required languages, following every procedural rule. Logged into the official compact record at 9 o'clock in the morning chamber time. I had asked that it be placed on the morning agenda. It was placed instead in the secondary queue. That was fine. We had not filed it for the agenda. We had filed it because the record mattered. What happened next was not about the record. The session that morning had the usual rhythm of a compact gathering. Slow, procedural, filled with the ambient noise of 43 delegations doing the quiet work of interstellar bureaucracy. Translation feeds hummed. Aides moved along the outer corridors. The great chamber held its pale, sourceless light, and Councillor Ari's voice moved through the agenda items with its familiar, unhurried precision. I sat in my chair at the far end of the arc and waited. I had not slept much, not from nerves. I had moved past nerves weeks ago, into a state that felt more like the stillness before a long journey, when everything is packed and the door is closed and there is nothing left to do but begin. I had eaten breakfast. I had read through the Declaration one final time, though I had it memorized. I had sat at Louise Fawn's desk for a while in the dark before the building's lights came on, thinking about nothing in particular. The Declaration had been logged. Conrad had confirmed at 2 o'clock in the morning that all 214 vessels were ready. The crews were aboard. The families who had chosen to come, and not everyone had, this was never a forced exodus, never a demand, were in their berths or their observation lounges, waiting. 214 ships scattered across the solar system and the nearby transit corridors. Each one running quiet. Each one carrying in its drive core a piece of technology that had taken 16 years and 63 engineers and an incalculable number of failures to build. The Compact did not know about the ships. They monitored human military vessels, flagged human colonial transports, tracked anything with a registered hull number in the navigation database. These ships had no registered hull numbers. They had been built in facilities that did not appear on any Compact register, using supply chains that had been deliberately fragmented across dozens of small contractors, none of whom had seen the complete picture. The Compact had always found humanity slightly beneath their notice. This, it turned out, had been useful. The morning session moved through its items. A trade dispute involving corridor tolls. A joint scientific proposal from the Doro and Ulith regarding deep scan surveys of the 9th cluster. A procedural motion about the format of session transcripts. I watched the clock on my terminal. At 10:47, Presiding Councillor Ari paused between agenda items. She had received the declaration. I knew this because the secondary queue notifier on my terminal had shifted from amber to acknowledged at 9:03, which meant her office had processed it. She looked down at her materials for a moment. "There is an item in the secondary queue," she said, "submitted by the human delegation. It is listed as an Exodus Declaration." She paused, a longer pause than usual, in which the chamber's ambient noise seemed to shift slightly. The way sound shifts when many creatures stop what they are doing at the same time. I will read the summary into the record. She read it. 3 paragraphs. Her voice carried no inflection beyond its usual precision, but she read every word, and the chamber heard every word. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the Doro delegation erupted, not in anger, not at first, in laughter. A deep, rolling, genuine laughter that bounced off the curved walls and filled the chamber from floor to ceiling. The lead Doro counselor, a broad-shouldered elder named Barak, was shaking his head with a wide grin, as if he had just heard the punchline of a very long and very good joke. "The humans," he announced to no one in particular, "are leaving." More laughter from several delegations. The Ulith were more restrained. They exchanged glances, their large eyes moving quickly among their group, but even they seemed to find something amusing in the moment. A Farith aide in the outer gallery covered their mouth. The whole chamber had the feeling of a thing being enjoyed, a small species making a grand gesture that everyone knew would come to nothing, like a child announcing they were running away from home. I sat in my chair and watched the clock. At 10:51, the monitoring station on Compact Platform 7, positioned at the edge of the solar system's transit corridor, detected a spatial anomaly. The automated alert appeared on the duty officer's screen. The duty officer flagged it for review. The review took 4 minutes because the readings were unlike anything in the Compact's database and required manual comparison against theoretical models. At 10:55, the alert was escalated to the chamber's technical liaison team. At 10:57, a technical aide appeared at the chamber's side entrance and moved quickly along the inner walkway toward the presiding counselor's station. He was walking fast, not running. Compact protocol did not permit running in the chamber, but moving with the particular controlled urgency of someone delivering news they do not fully understand and are frightened by. He reached Ari at 10:58. He leaned close and spoke quietly. I watched her face. She was very still for a moment. Then she looked up, and her eyes moved across the chamber with an expression I recognized because it was the one she had worn in that small room off the eastern corridor. The one that on a human face would have been grief, only now it had something else in it too. The laughter in the chamber had begun to quiet on its own. The way laughter does when a room starts to feel that something has shifted. The Doro counselor Barak had stopped grinning. He was looking at his own terminal, where something had begun to appear. Ari raised her hand, and the chamber went fully silent. I am receiving, she said carefully, reports from monitoring platforms at multiple locations in and around the human solar system. They are detecting spatial fold events. She paused. 214 of them. Simultaneously. Nobody laughed now. The readings were appearing on the chamber's shared display, the large curved screen above the central podium that was usually used for maps and data presentations. It showed the human solar system, and blooming across it, one by one and then all at once, were fold signatures. Not small ones. Not the brief, unstable flickers that compact theorists had been attempting for decades. Full, sustained, large-scale folds. Each one large enough to admit a ship. Each one holding open for longer than the Compact's best models said was possible. Each one pointed outward, toward regions of space that the Compact's navigation charts marked simply as unknown. The room was completely quiet now. 43 delegations, hundreds of aides and observers, all watching the display. The fold signatures winked one by one. And then the ships passed through them, and the signatures closed, and where 214 vessels had been, there was nothing. They were gone. Not destroyed. Gone beyond the map. I heard Barak say something very quietly to his aide. I did not catch the words, but I caught the tone. I stood up. This was not in the protocol. Junior delegations in the secondary queue did not simply stand up in the middle of a session, but nobody stopped me. I walked to the central speaking position, the place where only senior counselors ever stood. I stood there and looked around the room. I had thought for many years about what I might say in this moment. I had written speeches. I had revised them. I had considered anger, and considered triumph, and considered a cold and devastating list of every rejection, every passed-over indicator light, every politely worded letter about externally caused damage. I had imagined standing here and making the Compact feel, at last, the full weight of what they had dismissed. What I actually felt standing there was tired. Not bitter tired, just tired. The way you feel at the end of a very long project, when the thing is done and the relief of completion is quieter than you expected. My name is Marcus Webb, I said. I am the human delegate to the Interstellar Compact. I have held this position for 15 years. And before me, the position was held for 22 years by a woman named Louise Funn, who was professional and patient and brilliant, and who was passed over in this chamber more times than I have counted. Before her, the position was held by 4 other human delegates, each of whom came here in good faith, and filed motions in good faith, and waited in good faith for the Compact to see them. The chamber was silent. Ari was watching me. Barak was watching me. All of them were watching me in a way that they had never watched me before. I noticed the difference, and I let it settle. We are not angry, I said. I want you to understand that clearly. The Exodus Declaration was not an act of anger. We are not leaving because we hate the Compact or because we wish it harm. We are leaving because the compact was never going to give us what we needed. And we finally decided to stop waiting for permission and go find it ourselves. That is all. I paused. The ships you are tracking are carrying human volunteers, families, engineers, scientists, farmers, teachers, children who chose to come. Nobody was forced. Nobody was promised anything except the chance to build something new. We are going beyond your maps, into the space you marked as unremarkable and never visited. We do not know exactly what we will find. We are going anyway. I looked at Ari for a moment. She held my gaze. The Declaration thanks you for the past 81 years. I mean that genuinely. We learned a great deal here. We learned what we wanted to become, partly by watching what the compact was, and partly by watching what it was not. We hope the compact continues to function well. We have no quarrel with you. I gathered the single document I had brought to the speaking position, a hard copy of the Declaration, printed on actual paper, and set it on the central podium. This is our copy, I said. For your record. Then I walked back to my chair, picked up my bag, and walked out of the chamber. As I reached the door, I heard Barack's voice behind me, very quiet, asking Ari something. I did not hear the question. I heard her answer. She said, "I know." I did not look back. The corridor outside was long and curved and bright, and at the far end of it was the shuttle bay, and in the shuttle bay was a small craft with 2 crew members who had been waiting for 3 hours with the engine warm. I walked the full length of that corridor without stopping, and the lights of the chamber receded behind me, and I thought about Conrad Hale, somewhere already beyond the map, running his checks, watching his readings, doing what he had done for 16 years, the next thing, and then the thing after that, steady and relentless and entirely unconcerned with whether anyone was watching. The shuttle lifted away from the station. I watched the great structure of the compact council grow smaller through the viewport, the pale blue lights of its upper levels fading into the dark. And I thought about all the mornings I had ridden the sub-level 9 lift to my small office. All the sessions I had sat through in the farthest chair. All the indicator lights I had pressed and watched glow amber and go unanswered. I thought about my father at the kitchen table reading the letter about externally caused damage and not saying anything for a long time. I thought about Louise Fawn's note, "Keep your voice steady." My voice was steady. It had been steady for 15 years. I did not need to keep it steady anymore. I closed my eyes, and the shuttle carried me away from the light. The ship that carried me out was called the Dun, or a mid-sized vessel that Conrad's team had built in the Titan facility over 4 years, and that the Compact's navigation registry had never heard of. She was not beautiful in the way that the Compact's ships were beautiful. The Veth built their vessels the way they did everything, with long, clean lines and a kind of effortless elegance. But she was solid and well-made, and she moved through space with a quiet confidence that I found genuinely comforting. I had spent enough time in elegant spaces that made me feel small. The Dun Ore made me feel like I was supposed to be there. I had a cabin near the forward observation section. It was small and plain, and it had a window, which was all I needed. For the first 3 days after departure, I sat at that window for hours at a time and watched the dark go by, which sounds like something a troubled person does, but I was not troubled. I was resting. For the first time in 15 years, I was simply resting. Conrad found me there on the 4th day. He was a compact, energetic man in his late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the hands of someone who had spent decades doing precise manual work. There were old scars across his knuckles from years of working in confined engineering bays, and he moved with the slightly impatient energy of a person who is always slightly ahead of whatever conversation he is in. He sat down across from me without asking, which I had come to understand was just how Conrad operated, and handed me a report from the lead navigation team. "We have confirmed the fold coordinates for the first destination," he said. "The system the survey probes flagged 3 years ago. 12 light minutes from the primary star. 3 rocky planets in the liquid water zone. Preliminary atmospheric readings on the second one are—" He paused, and on his face was an expression I had rarely seen there, pure, uncomplicated delight. "Marcus, the second planet has oxygen. 19%. And we're detecting complex organic signatures." I looked at the report. Then I looked out the window for a moment. "How long until we arrive?" "At current fold rate, 4 days." I nodded. 4 days. I had waited 15 years. 4 days was nothing. What I had not told Conrad, what I had not told anyone yet, was that a transmission had arrived the morning after the council session, routed through the emergency diplomatic channel that still technically connected the human delegation's office to the compact. The office was vacant now. I had left the door unlocked and the lights off and Louise Fahn's note on the desk, which felt like the right way to leave it. But the channel still worked, and the transmission had come through, and I had read it sitting in my cabin on the dun or on the first night out, with the dark going by outside the window. It was from Ari. Not an official communication, not a compact document, a personal message sent from her private address. Brief and unformatted, completely unlike the precise, procedurally correct way she spoke in the chamber. We have been talking since the session. There are voices here who want to call it a threat. I am not one of them. I want you to know that I have been arguing, and I will continue to argue, that what you did was not aggression. It was clarity. We failed to offer you recognition. You found recognition elsewhere. The fault is entirely ours. She had ended with one more line, I hope you find something worth finding. I had read it 4 times. I had not responded immediately. On the second morning, I wrote back 2 sentences. We already have. I will send you word when we arrive. I had not told Conrad about the message. There would be time for the complicated feelings of it later. Right now, there was only forward, and the report in my hands, and a second planet with 19% oxygen and complex organic signatures, 4 days away. On the 5th day, one of the other ships in our fleet, a smaller vessel called the Heron, running parallel to us at a distance of about 40,000 kilometers, broadcast an open-channel message to the fleet. It was from a family aboard the Heron, a couple named Philip and Constance Adler who had brought their 3 children. The message was brief and slightly breathless, as if Constance had been crying before she recorded it and was working to keep her voice even. She said, We just passed the last coordinate on the compact's navigation charts. We're off the map. Officially off the map. Philip thinks we should say something profound. I cannot think of anything profound. I just wanted to say, we made it this far. We actually made it this far. The channel stayed quiet for a moment. Then someone on another ship played a piece of music, an old folk song from somewhere in Northern Europe, simple and unhurried, and it carried across the open channel, and several ships kept their channels open so it echoed and layered slightly, each ship's version a fraction of a second behind the others. It was not a grand moment. It was not the kind of moment you would put in an official record. It was the best moment I had experienced in 15 years. On the morning of the 4th day after Conrad's report, I was already at my cabin window when the navigation officer's voice came over the ship-wide channel, approaching fold exit point. Destination system in 1 minute. I pressed my hand against the glass. The dark outside was the same dark it had always been, indifferent and enormous, entirely unconcerned with what any species thought of it. Then the fold opened, and we came through. The star was smaller than Earth's sun, slightly orange, steady, and warm-looking in a way that I knew was entirely a subjective impression but could not help feeling anyway. The 3 rocky planets were exactly where the probes had said they would be. The second one hung in the middle distance, blue-gray and streaked with white, covered in what the early readings confirmed were water clouds. I stayed at the window for a long time. The fleet emerged behind us one by one, fold signatures blooming and closing, ships appearing out of the dark and settling into formation. 214 ships. Every one of them. Not a single one lost. Conrad had built them well. I opened a channel to Ari and recorded a short message. I told her we had arrived. I told her the second planet had an atmosphere we could work with. I told her the view from the forward observation window was unlike anything I had words for, though I tried. Orange star, blue-gray world, clean dark all around, and nobody anywhere in any direction who had ever decided we were not ready. I sent it. Then I closed the channel and watched as the Dunor's navigation team began plotting approach trajectories. A young crew member, barely 20, with an eagerness about her that reminded me of myself at the start of things, appeared at the door of the observation section. Her name was Lena Hall, and she had been one of Conrad's apprentices, and she had the particular look of someone who has something to say and is not quite sure how to say it. "We are getting a signal," she said. "From the second planet. It's faint, possibly natural, the science team says. Possibly not natural. I turned from the window. Possibly not natural, I repeated. Yes, sir. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back at me with those 20-year-old eyes that had not yet learned to be unsurprised by anything. Tell the science team to keep listening, I said. And tell Conrad the first want a report in an hour. She nodded and went. I turned back to the window, back to the orange star and the blue-gray world and the clean, uncharted dark. I thought about Ari saying, "I hope you find something worth finding." Outside the window, a signal that was possibly not natural was coming from a world no compact cartographer had ever named. Something was there. Something that the compact, in 900 years of careful, elegant, thorough civilization, had never thought to look for because it was beyond the map they had drawn. And the maps they drew were always just a little too small. I smiled for the first time in a long time. We had only just arrived. The signal took 3 weeks to decode. When it was decoded, it turned out to be a navigational marker, the kind of thing a spacefaring species places at the edge of its local system to warn approaching vessels of orbital hazards. It was approximately 400 years old. The species that had left it called themselves, in their own language, something that our translation systems eventually rendered as the TERV. They were not currently spacefaring. They had been briefly, 4 centuries ago, before something, a resource depletion event, as best we could reconstruct from the marker's data, had driven them back to the surface of their world. Now they were something closer to what humanity had been 500 years ago, industrializing, curious, building radio telescopes in their northern continents and looking up at the stars with the particular mixture of wonder and longing that we recognized because we had felt it ourselves not so long ago. We did not land on the second planet. We were not ready for that, and neither were they. Instead, we established orbit and spent 8 months listening. Listening was something humans had learned to do well during 81 years of being talked over. I sent regular transmissions to Ari during those months. She responded to each one. The transmissions were personal, not official. The compact had not requested communication with the human Exodus fleet, and we had not offered an official channel. What we had was this: 2 old adversaries who had finally begun to speak honestly, separated by a distance that made each exchange take hours each way, writing to each other across the dark with a frankness that neither of us had managed face to face in a chamber full of politics. She told me in one message that the compact had begun an internal review of its provisional membership criteria. She was careful about how she phrased it. She was always careful. It was the Veth way, but the meaning was clear. The sight of 214 ships vanishing off the edge of the navigation map had unsettled the Council in ways that were not entirely unwelcome. "There are species here," she wrote, "who have been in provisional status far longer than humanity. The Farath have been provisional for over 400 years. Nobody ever asked whether that was reasonable. I am asking now." I read that message in my cabin on the Dun Or with the blue-gray world of the TERV filling the window, and I thought about Counselor Ari in that small room off the eastern corridor, telling me with complete certainty that it was simply the nature of the process. People change slowly. Civilizations change more slowly. But they change. After 8 months of listening, we made contact. It was not the dramatic moment that human entertainment had always imagined it would be. No great ships landing on plazas. No ceremonial meetings of leaders. It was a radio signal sent from one of our communication specialists, a quiet and methodical man named Arthur Hall, no relation to Conrad, a coincidence that had caused mild confusion for months, who had a gift for mathematical patterning that translated across species barriers better than language did. Arthur sent a greeting built entirely from prime numbers and basic geometric relationships. The TERV responded in 11 hours. Then we responded. Then they responded again, faster this time. Within 2 weeks, we had the beginnings of a shared mathematical vocabulary. Within 6 months, we had a working translator. The first thing the TERV asked us when the translator was good enough to carry the question was, "Are you from the Council?" I was in the communication bay when that question came through. Arthur looked at me. The whole room looked at me. "What Council?" I asked. The answer took some time to extract, but what emerged gradually across multiple exchanges over several weeks was this. The TERV knew about the Interstellar Compact. They had known for a long time. Not from direct contact. The compact had never been here, had never looked here, had never sent explorers into this region because they had decided it was unremarkable. But the compact's outer monitoring transmissions leaked, as transmissions do, and the TERV's radio telescopes had been picking them up for decades. The compact sounded powerful and ancient and very certain of itself. The TERV had decided, without ever being asked, that a species like theirs, young, recently grounded, still rebuilding, would not be welcome there. "We hid our signals," the TERV diplomat told us. Her name came through the translator as something close to Vera, a phonetic approximation that our team used with her permission, since the actual sound was in a frequency range human ears did not comfortably produce. When we realized how far the Council's reach extended, we adjusted our transmissions to appear as natural background. We have been doing this for 60 years. 60 years of hiding from a civilization that had never even looked in their direction. 60 years of deliberately making themselves invisible to something they were afraid might find them and find them insufficient. I thought about indicator lights that glowed amber for 4 minutes and were never acknowledged. I thought about the letter about externally caused damage. I thought about the Farith delegate who had voted in my favor on the day my motion failed, and who had been in provisional status for 400 years. "We are not from the Council," I told Vera. "We left." She was quiet for a long time. "Why?" she said. It was a complicated question. I thought about how to answer it simply. "Because they did not see us," I said. "So we went somewhere we could build something that did." Another pause. Then she said something that the translator first rendered incorrectly and then corrected itself on. "Will you see us?" I looked at Arthur. He looked at his console. Outside the viewport, the blue-gray world of the TERV turned slowly in the orange starlight. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what we came here to do." What followed was not a quick process. I want to be honest about that. There was no sudden flowering of trust, no immediate alliance. There was work, careful, patient, incremental work. The same kind of work that had built the rift drive, and decoded the navigational marker, and established the shared mathematical vocabulary. We spent 2 years in orbit before any human set foot on the TERV surface. We spent another year after that before Vera agreed to visit the Dunor. The first time she saw the ship's observatory window, she stood in front of it for a long time without speaking, looking at her own world from outside it. I was watching her face when she said, almost to herself, "I did not know it looked like that." Meanwhile, the compact was changing. Ari's internal review of provisional membership criteria had expanded into something larger, a full structural examination of how the compact admitted and retained member species. Driven partly by the momentum of her advocacy, and partly, I suspected, by the embarrassment of watching humanity do in 2 years what the compact had failed to do in 900. Species they had never encountered were apparently trusting the humans. The humans were apparently finding things. The humans were apparently, in the words of one Doro counselor's message that was not meant for me but got forwarded anyway, doing rather well for a species we never thought about. The Farith were the first to receive full compact recognition after the review concluded. 431 years of provisional status, ended by a procedural amendment that Ari pushed through the Council in a single session, using language I recognized in places as echoing arguments I had made in my failed motion 17 years earlier. She mentioned this in a message to me. One line, "The arguments improve with time, it seems." I wrote back, "Or the listeners do." She did not respond to that one for 2 weeks. When she did, she said, "Both, perhaps." We established our first permanent settlement on the TERV's largest continent in the 3rd year, at a site that Vera's government had selected and that we had accepted without negotiation because it was their world and the choice was theirs to make. The settlement was small at first, 300 people, mostly engineers and agricultural specialists and teachers, and it was built to be useful to the TERV as much as to us, with facilities designed for shared use rather than exclusive human occupation. I attended the opening of the settlement. I stood on actual ground, actual soil, under an orange sky that was slightly more gold than Earth's blue, and breathed air that was thin enough to make me slightly light-headed at first, but that my lungs adjusted to within a day. Children ran past me, human children born on the ships, who had never stood on ground before. One of them stopped in front of me and looked at me with a direct, unafraid gaze of someone who does not yet know that adults are sometimes complicated. "Is this ours?" she said. I looked at the settlement, at the TERV's rolling hills beyond it, at the orange star sitting low on the horizon. "It belongs to everyone who lives here," I said. And anyone else who wants to live here peacefully." She considered this for a moment. Then she ran off after the other children, satisfied, as children often are, with answers that adults would spend years second-guessing. I am writing this account now, 3 years after the settlement was established. Not because anyone asked me to. I started it in the evenings after the settlement work was done because I wanted to remember things the way they actually happened, before my memory of them became too smooth and selective to be useful. Old people's memories tend toward the meaningful and away from the complicated, and I did not want to lose the complicated parts. The passed-over indicator light, the 9 minutes of council deliberation before the first rejection, the laughter in the chamber on the morning of the fold. The laughter especially. I wanted to remember the laughter honestly, without letting it become something simpler than it was. Without letting it become pure evidence of the compact's failure, or pure wound, or pure justification for everything we did afterward. It was more complicated than any of those. They laughed because we seemed small, and we were small, and we knew we were small, and we were building something enormous in secret while they laughed. None of that cancels any other part of it out. We were not heroes. We were people who were patient for a very long time and then stopped being patient. And that is a thing that happens. I am 81 years old now. As I write this final section of the account, that number has a symmetry I did not plan. 81 years, the same number of years humanity spent in the compact before the Exodus Declaration. I notice it without attaching too much meaning to it. Sometimes numbers are symmetrical by coincidence. The settlement on the Turv's world has a name now. The humans call it Harrow, after a small town in England that nobody in the settlement has ever been to, but that the founding engineer, a woman named Dora Kimball, who did not survive to see the settlement's 5th year, had grown up in and spoken about often. The Turv call it something in their own language that the translator renders roughly as the place the Skywalkers planted themselves, which is poetic and also accurate. Harrow has 3,000 people now, mostly humans, but the Turv have had a presence there for 2 years, a small community of Turv scientists and students who live and work alongside the humans, and whose children play with human children in a way that makes the adults from both species watch and feel something they do not always have words for. Vera still visits sometimes. She is older now, moving more slowly, but her voice is the same, measured and curious, entirely unwilling to be hurried. We found 2 more habitable systems in the years after arriving here. The Outer Concordat, the governing body we established for the human settlements and the species who have chosen to join us, now spans 11 member species. Each one a full member from the moment of joining. No provisional status. No secondary queue. We wrote that into the founding charter with deliberate care, knowing exactly why we were writing it. The Compact sent an ambassador to the Outer Concordat 4 years ago, not to negotiate, not to demand anything, to observe, and eventually to participate if the Concordat's members agreed to allow it. The members agreed. The Compact's ambassador is a young Yulith woman named Saya, not the aide who told me he had worked for 11 years and walked away. That was a long time ago, and she attends our sessions and takes careful notes and asks good questions and has never once treated any of our members as though they belong in a secondary queue. The Compact has changed. Not entirely, not without resistance, not without the slowness that is inseparable from very large and very old institutions, but it has changed. The provisional membership reforms that Ari pushed through have restructured how 11 species are classified. The Farath have full recognition. 3 species that had been waiting longer than the Farath are now in active reclassification proceedings. Ari herself died 2 years ago. The Veth live long lives, but not infinite ones, and she had been old even by their standards for some time before the end. She sent me a final message about a week before she died, which I suspect she knew was the situation because she wrote with the efficiency of someone who had things to say and limited time to say them. "I have been thinking," she wrote, "about the question I asked you in the small room. You told me you were leaving. I asked why, and you told me it was because we did not see you. I have been thinking about whether, if we had seen you, truly seen you, from the beginning, you would have stayed. I think the answer is that you would not have. I think you were always going to go. I think the Compact was perhaps not where humans were meant to be. What I regret is that we spent 81 years being uncertain about you when the only correct response to humans was to be uncertain about ourselves." I read that message in the same cabin where I had read her first one, with the orange star outside the window and the sounds of Harrow below. I did not respond. There was nothing to say that would improve the message, and some things deserve to be received in silence. The session of the Outer Concordat that met to formally note her death did so with a moment of quiet that lasted 1 full minute, not prescribed by protocol, simply agreed to by everyone in the room without discussion. Vera, who attended the session in person, had met Ari once at a diplomatic gathering 2 years earlier. She told me afterward that Ari had sat with her for an hour and asked her questions about the Turv's history, not the history of their near-space period, but the older history, before the radio telescopes, before the resource collapse, back when they were something simpler and perhaps happier. She wanted to know about our stories, Vera said. The ones we tell children. I thought about that for a long time. The account I am writing will end here. Not because the story is over, it is not over, it will continue long after I am not here to observe it, but because the part one need to tell is finished. What I set out to remember is remembered. The small office on Sublevel 9. Louise Fawn's note. The indicator light. The 9 minutes. The laughter. The fold signatures blooming across the display in the Grand Council chamber, one by one and then all at once. What I want to leave behind for whoever reads this is not a list of grievances, and not a celebration, and not a warning. It is something simpler than any of those. We were told by people who had been powerful for a very long time that we were not ready. That we would never be ready. That this was not an insult but simply biology, simply the nature of the process, simply the way things were and always would be. We listened to them. We kept our voices steady. We went back to our small office on Sublevel 9, and we got to work on the thing they said could not be done. They let us go quietly. No war, no anger. I think at the time they believed that was kindness. I think now they understand that it was something else. The moment when a civilization looks at something it failed to recognize, watches it walk out of the room under its own power, and understands, too late and too clearly, exactly what it was looking at all along. Regret is a strange thing. It does not undo what was not done. But it does sometimes make the person carrying it more careful about the next thing. And the compact is being more careful now. I have seen the evidence of it in Saya's careful questions, in Ari's reform documents, in the reclassification proceedings, in the young Veth diplomat who reads the archive transcripts and writes papers about systematic blindness. They are learning to look differently. It took losing us to teach them. We did not leave to teach them anything. We left because it was time to leave, and because Conrad Hale had built 214 ships, and because Constance Adler wanted to tell someone that she had actually made it this far. We left because the Orange Star and the Blue-Gray World were waiting without knowing they were waiting. And because the Turv had been hiding their signals for 60 years out of a fear that turned out to be unnecessary. We left because the map the compact had drawn was always just a little too small. Outside the window of my cabin, Harrow is bright in the evening light. The Orange Star is lower now, thicker and warmer at the horizon, and it turns the settlement's rooftops a color I have never quite been able to name. Something between copper and gold, specific to this world, specific to this star, not found anywhere in the compact's catalogs because the compact's catalogs do not reach this far. Children are running somewhere below. I cannot see them, but I can hear them, that particular high noise that children make when they are chasing each other, and the whole game has no purpose except the running itself. Tomorrow the Concordat has its quarterly session. Saya will be there, taking her notes. 2 new species have applied for membership. One from the system Conrad's team is surveying 3 folds away, one from a world the Turv told us about, a species the Turv have been aware of for centuries but never contacted because they were not sure it was their place to reach out. We told them it is everyone's place to reach out. The session will be long. There are always things to discuss, problems to untangle, decisions that have no clean answer. Species who want more than we can give, and others who want less than they deserve, and the whole difficult, slow, necessary work of building something that actually holds. I will be tired by the end of it. I will also be exactly where I am supposed to be. They let us go quietly. No war, no anger. They thought they were being merciful, releasing something they had never fully seen, waving away a small species with a polite decline and a secondary queue and 90 years of good intentions that never quite reached action. They thought the quiet was theirs to give. They did not know, and I think they know now, that the quiet was never theirs to give. It was ours to keep. We kept it all the way to the edge of their maps, and then past the edge, and then into the dark, where the orange stars wait and the signals are possibly not natural and the children run on actual ground and breathe actual air that nobody ever thought to name. We kept it, and we built something in it, and the something is still growing. That is the end of what I have to say, except for this. Louise Fahn's note is still on the desk in sublevel 9. I left it there. I hope whoever found it read it. I hope they kept their voice steady. I think about that moment often now. Standing on the observation deck of the Dun-Or, watching the orange star set over Harrow. The same orange star that had been waiting for us, unknowing, while we spent 81 years being passed over in a chamber that never truly saw us. The outer concordat is real now. It exists. 11 member species, each one a full member from the moment of joining. No provisional status. No secondary queue. We wrote that into the founding charter with deliberate care, knowing exactly why we were writing it. The children who run through Harrow streets do not know what a secondary queue is. They will never need to learn. The compact changed. Not completely. Change is slow, and the compact is very old, but it changed. The Farath have full recognition now. 3 other species that had been waiting longer than the Farath are in active reclassification proceedings. Ari's reforms, the one she pushed through after watching 214 ships vanish off the edge of the map, are still in place. I like to think she would be satisfied with how far they have come. Saya, the young Ulith ambassador, still attends our sessions. She still takes careful notes and asks good questions. She has never once treated any of our members as though they belong in a secondary queue. I think Ari would have liked her. I think Ari would have recognized something familiar in the way she keeps her voice steady and does not look away. Vera still visits Harrow sometimes. She is older now, slower, but her voice is the same, measured and curious, entirely unwilling to be hurried. We sit on the observation deck together sometimes, watching the orange star set, and we do not always talk. Some things do not need to be said between people who have learned to see each other. The Turv are spacefaring again now. Not far, not fast, but they are building. They are looking up at the stars with the same mixture of wonder and longing that we recognized when we first arrived. This time, when they reach out, someone will answer. We made sure of that. The settlement has grown. Harrow has nearly 5,000 people now, humans and Turv and others who have found their way here through the Concordat's open invitation. The school teaches in 4 languages. The market trades goods from 3 star systems. The children who run through the streets do not remember a time when humanity was provisional. I am old now. I do not attend every session anymore. There are younger voices in the chamber, steadier hands, people who will carry this work forward when I cannot. I am not worried about them. They learned the right lessons. They know what it means to be unseen, and they know what it means to build something that sees. I still have Louise Fahn's note. I took it with me when I left sublevel 9. It sits on the desk in my cabin, under the observation window, where I can see it when I look up from my work. Keep your voice steady, it says. I have kept it steady for 15 years. I do not need to keep it steady anymore, but I find I do anyway. Some habits are worth keeping. The Compact sent a message last year. Not a formal communication, not a document, a personal message from Saya to the Concordat's Council. It said, in part, "We are still learning. We are still grateful. We have not forgotten what we lost when you left, and we have not stopped trying to understand it." I read that message on a quiet evening, with the orange star going down outside the window and the sounds of Harrow rising up from below. I did not respond. Some things do not need a response. They only need to be received. They let us go quietly. No war, no anger. They thought the quiet was theirs to give. It was not. It was ours to keep. We kept it all the way to the edge of their maps, and then past the edge, and then into the dark, where the orange stars wait, and the signals are possibly not natural, and the children run on actual ground and breathe actual air that nobody ever thought to name. We kept it, and we built something in it, and the something is still growing. That is the whole story. That is the whole truth. And it is enough. Louise Fahn's note is still on my desk. I look at it sometimes, and I think about the long years of being passed over. I think about the morning I stood in the chamber and told 43 delegations that we were leaving. I think about the laughter, and the silence after the laughter, and the fold signatures blooming across the display. And I think about the quiet we kept, and the quiet we built, and the quiet that is still growing. We are still out here. We are still building. We are still listening. And we are still keeping our voices steady, not because anyone is testing us, but because we chose to. That is the difference. That is everything.